So what I'll typically do is I'll post all your recordings to the class page. So I'll do that on the announcement sections here, because I'm not sure that we have, we don't have the actual Zoom link, but what I'll do is have a YouTube playlist for you all. All right, now, in terms of things that you need to do, so first off, both of you need to write something on this welcome to the class discussion. So if you go into your forums and the discussion question there, you both have to say something. It doesn't matter what you put, just as long as you say something. And it's because this is how the school tracks your attendance for the first 2 weeks. And even though we're not an attendance taking institution, you have to take attendance the first week or whatever because of financial aid reasons. It's essentially a way to prevent financial aid fraud kind of thing. So you just have to make sure you write something there by the end of the week. I wrote here just some things that we're going to be covering. So immediately that's what you need to do. And then just so you know, your book is all online here. So under the course materials, you'll get the link for the book here. And that is that. All right, so there are 15 topics we have here. And since we have 16 weeks in the course, they kind of all go hand in hand with roughly about one topic a week. One of the things that you have here, where is it? Okay. So this presentation and coaching plan, this is going to be your kind of final presentation bit. You will have a final exam. So what I'll do is I'm going to have you do your final presentation and your final exam the last week of class. So the last week of class, we won't have any, like say, new material per se, but you'll be presenting your coaching plans and then taking the final. There's a whole lot of stuff this all says. What's funny is in the 325 class teaching baseball, with appropriate use of attire, they have something like make sure you have a clipboard and a whistle. But to sum all this up for you, and we'll go over this a lot more in detail later on, what you're going to do is you're going to teach me how to throw a pitch and how to swing a bat. And then you're going to correct my errors and give me a drill on how to work on those. So that's your kind of heads up for that. And then you will have another, you have another presentation in here somewhere. There we go. So under topic 8, the CLC. So, you know, CLC means group work. Obviously there's only 2 of you, so not really much of a group there. So you're going to both do this individually. And again, this is something we'll cover a lot more as we go through there. But what you're going to do is you're going to present a conditioning program for softball players. So what I'll do is I'll give you certain positions on the field, and you'll have to design a conditioning program specifically tailored for those positions. So those are the big things for you there. Throughout the course, you have a couple of like little papers, not really papers even, but just like little essays to write and some journals. Oh, there we go. So these are all pretty simple here to do, but this just gives you kind of that brief overview of everything we're going to do there. So any questions on that initially?
No.
Perfect. And with both of you playing in the past, it is going to make things really hopefully pretty simple for you. By no means do I consider this to be like a joke or blow off class, but at the same time, it's still, a coaching class. There's no like real big like tricks or major problems for you to solve kind of thing. It's pretty discreet with the things you need to do. The more kind of complex things that students historically have kind of struggled with is keeping a scorebook and doing any of the statistics stuff that we talked about. Now, we're going to go over the gambit of like sabermetrics and all of your analytical tools. You're not going to really be able, or not going to have to like calculate anything major. The only things you'd have to calculate would be like, say, your batting average, your on base percentage, maybe your slugging percentage. But all those are pretty simple. You can do number of at bats divided by number of hits, kind of, or number of hits divided by number of bats, kind of thing. Pretty easy there. But you're not going to have to, calculate, your WAR or your wins above replacement, or your, say, say percentages of hits based on ball exit velocity, that kind of thing. Now, a lot of those you'll need to know what they mean, but you won't have to calculate them. So, for example, for WAR or wins above replacement, you should know that that means whatever number you have for that is how many wins that person or that player is expected to generate for the team more than an average player at that position. So the higher the WAR number, the better. If you have a negative WAR number, it means that the team would be better off without you. But those are kind of the two big things that students have historically had some issue with, but we'll go over this enough for you where you shouldn't have any issue with it, at least hopefully. All right, your initial assignment here for this week is to write a coaching philosophy. In terms of content quantity, I'm not too big of a stickler for that. I know we have to have a set parameter of, words for the assignment. So, yes, 300 to 400 words. If you're over under that, I'm not too concerned. I'm much more worried about the content than just the quantity of words you have, that kind of thing. And also I should mention that as far as like late work goes, you can turn in anything late for any reason you want. Just make sure you communicate that with me ahead of time. So even if it's Sunday night and you just send me a text saying, hey, Mike, I just forgot to do my work. Can I have an extra day to do it? Sure, that's no problem. Just let me know. Now, granted, some circumstances you have no control over. I mean, if you were in the hospital or got hurt or sick or something, yeah, I mean, I don't expect to be your first phone call kind of thing. But for any normal reasoning, just make sure you tell me ahead of time. Otherwise, it's 10% off each day you're late. And I think that's the school standard, right? 10% off. Yeah, makes that easy. All right, so what we're going to cover today is this whole bit on coaching philosophy. So what you're going to essentially be doing is developing your own personal philosophy as it pertains to coaching. There's a few different kind of sections that this prompt gives you. So use of guiding life principles, a roadmap, priorities to develop and establish, and the priorities in keeping focus on life goals and meeting challenges. I know they use the term, life goals, life principles, and we'll kind of explain more of what that means here in a little bit. But as far as your APA formatting goes, yeah, generally speaking, any paper should be APA formatted. For these, since they're really not like papers, they're just more or less essays, I'm not worried so much about APA formatting in terms of like, say, having a proper cover page and, your section headers and all that. When you turn in any sort of bigger project, yeah, I want you to have a by the book APA paper. For something like this or your journal entries, you can just put, your name in the corner kind of thing, and just make sure your writing good. For any of your, if you're citing anything, you want to do APA citation, so both in text and have a reference list. You don't necessarily have to cite anything for this though, because as you'll see with your philosophy, this is your personal philosophy. So you most likely will be able to develop this without using any outside sources. So yeah, pretty straightforward there. Now that said, what exactly is a philosophy of anything? So you like hear the term, that's my philosophy, or that's my personal philosophy. What do you actually mean?
Like your idea or belief, like how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. The term I'm going to use for you here can't make D's look right, but is paradigm. Either of you heard of this word before?
Maybe.
I'm sure you've heard it. But yeah, it's like one of those things like, what's the definition? Oh, well, I mean, I'm better off using it in the sentence than I am telling you the exact definition. But if you were looking at religion, you would use the term dogma. But paradigm is a firm set of beliefs. And it's kind of more than that, though. It's your like concrete rules you live by kind of thing. So if you have a paradigm, that is the established, firm, concrete set of beliefs that you have for something. And that's what's really going to go into a lot of your coaching philosophy, is what you believe. Now, when you're developing a coaching philosophy, both of you have played, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Where do you get your concept of how to coach? Or how did both of you learn of how you should be coaching?
I guess from the coaches I had.
Yeah, because as a player, what do you know?
Not much, I guess, without a coach.
Well, yeah, you only know what your coach teaches you or what your coach tells you. If you've ever had any, say, like early childhood development or motor skills learning classes or anything like that, you'll find that with children, they are absolutely helpless on their own. You have a small child, they cannot care for themselves, right? They learn everything from their parents or whomever is taking care of them. And it's because they don't know anything better. And even think about when both of you were kids, at what point or at what age did you start being able to have higher level thinking? Like say, actually questioning why something was happening as opposed to just this is happening.
I would say like, I don't know, middle school.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. Around that, 12, 14, 15 age, around the time you would like say typically go through puberty, that's usually the time where you have enough brain development to be able to do this higher level thinking, where it's the whole philosophical type thinking as opposed to concrete or discrete thinking. So yes, I have an 18-month-old son. I teach him how to do sign language, and he knows how to do baby sign language. He can ask me for milk and tell me, please, and he's sorry, and, binky kind of thing. But does he actually know, what it means to, say, fill up his milk bottle? Or does he know that there's only a certain amount in there and he can judge how much it is based on what the volume number says on the side? No, he doesn't know that. He just knows he asked for milk. I give him milk kind of thing. Other than that, he doesn't really know anything about anything. And if I weren't teaching him something, or if he wasn't learning something from my wife or whatever, he's not going to pick that up. With your coaching, and granted, I never played softball competitively. I played baseball, but kind of similar, right? It's one thing to play, and I'm sure both of you have realized with even, having brief stints in coaching, that it's a completely different thing when you take that and go into a coaching environment. And then even different still if you were to say do any umpiring. I remember when I was undergrad and during the summers, I would umpire back in Ohio for my whatever hometown league system, whatever. So I would do everything from like little league up through, high school summer ball. And even after playing baseball for, 15 years or so, the amount of knowledge you have about these different positions, so umpiring versus playing, it's, almost night and day. The point is that it's good to have that background as a player, but then to establish yourself as a coach, it takes a completely different skill set. Now, like I said, most of what you initially learn comes from what you have been taught. Where else would you think you'd be getting information from to develop a coaching philosophy?
I guess I got it from my dad, because he's like the guy. He's more in sports than my mom. So
Okay.
yeah.
Same with me, and also I got a lot of what I know from watching like college games.
Yeah, that's definitely a great way to do it. Whenever you're developing a philosophy, one of the things to really consider is how rigid or fluid that philosophy is. You look at, and granted, before both of your times, I'm assuming, so if you were looking at, say, prior to the year 2000, and really more likely prior to like 1990, that old school coaching mindset, what was it? Typically, if you're thinking of like that, an old school philosophy for coaching, especially like baseball, softball, football, it was really, this is my way or the highway kind of thing. It was, do as I say, not as I do, all that good stuff. And you look at how much that has shifted, how much the paradigm has shifted. Now, if I were to tell you to do something, what naturally is a reasonable response for you?
Ask why.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't stand up anymore to just say, because I said so, or because that's the way we've always done it, that kind of thing. Athletes these days are smart for the most part. And especially since everyone has, a supercomputer in their pocket, you can verify virtually anything within minutes. I mean, pretty much either of you can say anything you want to take as a fact, and I can verify that in a matter of minutes just by looking it up on the internet. So when you say to do something as a coach, you need to know or have a good rationale for why you're doing that. Otherwise, you're not going to get the buy-in from your team that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, your coaching philosophy should be something that's pretty fluid. When I was coaching, say, Pony League baseball back in like the mid 2000s, I was coaching 13 and 14-year-olds, and I went in with the idea that I was going to be, say, trying to play like a kind of power ball or long ball type of strategy where, we would have, big guys to hit home runs and, hit the ball in the gap and that kind of thing, have power pitchers to just shut everyone down. And I get there and half the team is like, say, under 5'5" kind of thing. I have a bunch of tiny kids. Now, if I were to keep that same coaching philosophy, how well do you think that would work for that particular team?
Not very well.
Yeah, probably not. And that's because your coaching philosophy, especially when in terms of strategy, has to be adaptable to the team you have. If you have a power team that are all, say, 6'5", 250 pounds, and they're slow as heck, it's not going to do you any good to try to turn them into people that are going to do like bunt and runs and stealing bases and that kind of thing. It doesn't fit what they're able to do. Conversely, you take a tiny team or a team that doesn't have much power and you try to get them to hit home runs, and that's not going to work either. So you have to be fluid with that. Now, what kind of advantage do you have, though, as, say, a college coach that you wouldn't have in, say, high school or earlier?
Recruiting.
What's that?
Recruiting.
Recruiting, yes. And why is that important?
You can go out and you can find players that fit your idea or the other players that you already have.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the big benefits there, because as a college coach, you can go and say, I only want to recruit these players who have these characteristics that fit the system I have. Now, granted, sometimes that doesn't always work out, especially if you don't get the recruits that you want. Or sometimes you just have an amazing player that may not fit your system, but are you going to say no to them? I mean, would any school in the country say no to Mike Trout or Bryce Harper kind of thing? Even if you had a program that was completely opposite of anything they did, I'm pretty sure you would welcome them, with open arms. 5-tool guy hits 40 home runs, steals 40 bases. Nah, I'm good. But you get the idea there. If you're too rigid in your approach, you're not going to be able to get the full potential out of your team. And that goes for really any sport, All right. When you're building a coaching philosophy, and you look really through everything in the text here, the author gives you a really good overall background as to, like, okay, these are different kind of components for this and that. But really, what would you consider to be really the categories or the pillars you would need to base your philosophy on? So what would be kind of the major categorical points you would want?
Do you mean just for I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
Yeah, so when you're developing your own coaching philosophy, or just any coaching philosophy for that matter, what categories would you want to include in there? So I'll give you one example here. How about rules? So you have, like, say, team rules. You're required to maintain a 2.0 GPA or you're suspended off the team, something like that. But rules, that's your category there. What else could you think of?
I don't know if this is a category, but I know something big for me is communication.
Absolutely. And granted, we're going to cover this exclusively in topic 2, but who are you communicating with?
As a coach, your players, and if it's like high school ball or whatever, or like club travel stuff, like it's going to be their parents as well.
What if you're in college?
It would be with like your like athletic directors and people above you.
Absolutely. That's a really good one there. So I'm talking to you on my work computer, and I have this nice, old Wacom tablet that I can't use because I can't download the driver for it without my administrator rights. So you're unfortunately stuck with me using the mouse and the draw tool on Zoom here. Rules, communication, what else? You're building a philosophy here. What, think of this. This is your 10 commandments. That's probably the best way to think of it. Just think about your time as a player, and what did your coaches tell you or show you that you would think is part of their philosophies?
I know I had a high school coach who always instilled like different values in us. So like each practice we'd go over something different. So like trust or responsibility or and just how that relates on and off the field.
Good, and I'm glad you threw that on and off the field bit there. So I'm going to call that ethics and morals.
I guess similar to that, like establishing like a team culture, kind of.
Absolutely. You hear about, teams that have like a toxic environment or a toxic culture, or teams that have a really tight-knit group. And you can see how their performance is just closely parallels to the type of culture that's in there. You look at, let's say, the New England Patriots, right? They have the Patriot way, and that's what they've done for the last 20 years. And they've won 6 Super Bowls. And if you go to the Patriots, you are going to do it their way because that's the way their culture is. We do things a certain way here and we win. So it works, right? Now you look at the Washington football team, side note there. So I never thought they needed to change their name. I just thought they needed to change their name to a potato, or their logo to a potato. I thought that would have worked so much better. But so many reports coming out of there over the last year saying that they had like this toxic culture, that the executives were doing everything from being racist to having like doing retaliation against employees, all this stuff. How well have the Washington former Redskins been playing lately? Yeah, not the greatest, right? So you see how big of a role culture plays. And granted, that's just, one example, and granted from football, but you get the idea there. What else? Missing the big one here. Strategy, or what you're actually going to do. So with strategy, and granted, we're going to cover this in another topic as well, but you have to essentially have an idea of what it is or what kind of a game you're going to play. Like I said before, you know, if you have a bunch of big, hulking, powerful, slow athletes, you can't have the strategy of having them play, you know, small ball, trying to be a speed team, because that's not what they physiologically possess.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one kind of goes into a little bit with both of these. But psychology and player support. One of the big things we've seen shift in the field of coaching and really just in the world over the last roughly decade is the issue or the topic of mental health. When you look at the psychology of coaching, especially with how player psychology is, what are the big psychological factors for players to play?
Could you possibly rephrase that in a different way?
Yeah. So what made you want to play the game?
Honestly, just it was kind of a it seemed fun thing. Like it wasn't I didn't really have a motive, but once I started playing, it was like because just the fact that like I don't know, I'm outside, I'm active, I'm able to be doing stuff with other people and growing together with other people as a team. So
And then did you ever not want to play?
yeah, absolutely.
Why?
I was just tired. Like I felt like I was just ran out of gas.
There you go. So in motor development, we would call this a functional constraint. So your functional constraints are your attention to a task and your motivation to do a task. When you look at the psychology of coaching, and we're not going to get so much into that, but a little bit into it, or the psychology of sports, your players are motivated based on a number of both intrinsic and extrinsic factors. The intrinsic factors are going to be things like, you know, their desire to get better or just their personal drive to say win, that kind of thing, you know, being with their friends, you know, like you said, being outside, feeling good about doing something. The extrinsic factors would be something like if you were paying or playing for a scholarship or a paycheck, if you were playing for, you know, to win something like a trophy or a championship. Those are extrinsic factors or outside factors. When you look at the motivation to play overall, the big thing we see in athletes who have, for lack of a better word, mental health issues is they largely get burnt out from playing. So by overstressing them in terms of performance expectations, sheer time commitment, and then the actual results they get, you can really set yourself up for a pretty big trifecta there of, you know, things going downhill fast. I remember when I was playing Little League when I was 12, and, you know, we had, you know, the Little League World Series and all that. When I was 10, our 12-year-olds from my town came one game away from going to the Little League World Series. And then my group was supposed to be the ones that took us to the promised land kind of thing. So these, you know, huge expectations for us and whatnot. And by the time it got to our first like district qualifier game, I was like ready to just quit baseball forever. I mean, I just didn't want to do it anymore. And granted, I was, the 4-hitter on the team. I was the #1 pitcher. I was about 6 foot when I was 12 years old, and I only grew like 3 inches ever since. But between the time our regular season ended and our first game for All-Stars started, it was roughly about 3-ish weeks. And we were doing like 2 or 3 practices a day in, the middle of the summer kind of thing. And it just got to the point where it was a job. And as a 12-year-old, you don't want to get a job kind of thing. And I get the, you're building like the whole foundation of future success and whatnot. But at the same time, you can't ignore how people feel. And we're now bringing that much more to the forefront here. I can't tell both of you how to feel or how you are feeling, but that doesn't mean it's not valid for you to have whatever feelings you do. If you're, pushing a player to the point where they become burnt out on the game, obviously their performance is going to drop, but you have to look at what does that do to them off the field. And as a coach, you're with a player, let's even say with like in a college spectrum, you'd be with a player for around roughly 20 to 25 hours a week. I mean, that's still a good amount of time, but there's 24 hours in a day. So that's essentially 6 full days they're away from you kind of thing. The point is that what they do off the field is much more important to their own psyche than it is what's on the field in terms of that time perspective. It's like when I was a personal trainer, I would see someone for an hour a day, 3 times a week, and I have no control over what they do the other whole 7 days they're not with me. So if they're not losing weight or not seeing progress, well, you're doing everything you can while you're on the field with me, but what are you doing off the field? So you see how psychology is a huge factor there. And I don't know if we have a whole sports psychology course here. I feel like we should. Obviously, I've never taught that, so. But you get the idea there. By player support, I'm meaning, how do you intend to treat your players? Some coaches have the whole, authoritarian measures. Others try to do more of like kind of being on a friendly level, that kind of thing. But by player support, it's essentially how you treat your players or how you are personally interacting with them. And I view this kind of the same way I would view being a parent or being a teacher, in that I don't want to treat either of you or treat my kid like, I'm above you. Yes, granted, I would strongly think that I know more about stuff than you, but at the same time, I don't want to be holding things over your head, like, say calling you names or making you feel dumb, that kind of thing. I don't want to do that. Now, just don't go and read my reviews on Rate My Professor, because it might be a little bit contrary to that. But I don't want to view myself as above you. At the same time, I can't be your friend. How do you say punish your friends kind of thing? Especially like with raising a child. Yeah, I do want to be a friend of my child, but I can't be his friend kind of thing and have that relationship. Still needs to be a parent-child relationship, or it still needs to be a student-teacher relationship. With coaching, there is that fine line to walk between being a player's coach and being too familiar with them. Granted, you don't want to be going and getting beers with the players after the game kind of thing, but at the same time, do you want to be, bringing down, the hammer on them for every little thing? And that's where, that whole player support comes into play. So we got 7 points there. Anything else you can all think of? So I would kind of use this as a framework to start building your own philosophy. Now, one of the things, here is it? I can't find the exact passage here, but whatever. With developing a coaching strategy, it's a good time to plagiarize. So typically you don't think of, academic dishonesty as being a good thing, but in terms of coaching, it is. Why would that be?
I feel like if somebody's done it well, it's like you should probably follow that, or at least use that as like a guideline to build your program, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely want to emulate programs that have had success in the past. Now, that doesn't mean to make a carbon copy of it, but at the same time, it means to take their foundations or their broad strokes and turn that into your own thing. Again, I'll go back to the Patriots. All the assistant coaches that have left the Patriots and gone on to coach as a head coach for other teams, you look at, like, say, Matt Patricia for the Lions and Mike Vrabel for the Texans, and now I think he's with, or no, Bill O'Brien's with the Texans, but still same thing. He's a Patriots guy, and Mike Vrabel's with the Titans. They all brought in pieces of that New England culture into their new cities. And it's all because, New England for the last 20 years has been the best football team. I mean, objectively speaking, they've won more championships in 20 years than every other team has won in the entire history of the National Football League. I mean, it's pretty remarkable if you think of it. So why wouldn't you try to copy that, Now, it's never going to work exactly the same. You can't make the exact carbon copy. That's not going to work. But taking pieces of what does work and helping to form that foundation of what you're building is definitely going to be a huge thing for you there. Conversely, you don't really want to be emulating losing programs, right? I mean, I can't imagine too many people are rushing to find out, what, that rowdy Cleveland Browns team is going to be up to next, But at the same time, it's good to be able to find faults in other people's programs so that you can make sure you don't do that or you learn from it. You're going to learn as much, if not more, from your failures than you will about your wins or your successes. Now, another thing I wanted to touch on here, because with this, you want to be having not only priorities, but these goals and challenges. So looking at your objectives here, and objectives you can think of as goals. As a coach, what should be your number one goal? And actually, let me qualify that. If you are a high school coach or higher, what should be your number one goal?
I guess you don't really want to say winning specifically, but like making your players the best players they can be, which would probably result in winning.
Yeah, so the ultimate goal is to win the championship. You're in college, you want to win the College World Series. If you're a professional, you want to win the World Series or whatever equivalent we have in softball. In high school, it's typically a state championship, but that's the ultimate goal. You want to win, because why are you playing if you're not playing to win, kind of thing? I'm not a huge fan of participation trophies, but at the same time, yeah, I get when you're a kid that those are, nice to have. But when you're in that high school level and higher, that's when you're playing for actual stuff. I mean, in high school, think about you're playing to, say, go to college. Well, what do you get when you go to college as a, say, a softball player?
There's a lot of pain.
A what?
You can go.
I said scholarship.
Yeah.
Money.
And what does a scholarship equal?
Money.
Money. Yes, absolutely. And anytime you start playing for money, then things start getting a little bit higher stakes, right? Now, granted, if, whenever anyone gets a scholarship, they don't actually see that money, but you get the idea. Especially like if you were a professional athlete, you're playing for a paycheck. You are quite literally playing for your job. So the winning is, yes, obviously going to be the number one objective. Now, when we think of then everything outside of winning, now what else are my goals that I'm going to have?
I know I'd want my team to be a team, so just to be able to be in good community, I guess, with each other.
Okay. How would you actually measure that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Usually when you think of developing goals, you think of having like SMART goals. So, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time sensitive. Sometimes though, these things aren't necessarily quantifiable in terms of what a coaching goal would be. Yes, I can quantify exactly how many wins I need to have a winning season. I can quantify, what a title looks like, all that. But if you're building community or rapport or a culture, there's not really a way to quantify that. It's more like something you would qualify almost. So everyone knows what a good culture looks like. Everyone knows what a toxic culture looks like. But how do you put that into writing? That's a little bit more nuanced there, where you kind of have to describe the overall, say, culture you want to establish, not necessarily that these are the checkpoints I'm going to hit, but still a good point to have. What other goals would you have as a coach? So Madison, you said to develop players before.
Mm-hmm.
Who else can you develop?
I mean, if you're the head coach, you can like develop a good coaching staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So developing your assistant coaches as well as your head coaches there. Or I'm sorry, developing your assistant coaches as well as your players there. When you get into, say, college sports, typically that development leads into successes on the field. When you look at, say, high school, you're trying to develop players to get them into college. And usually that's where you'll also see that translation into overall good seasons or good results. But when you think about even just with both of your own personal, journeys playing softball through life, how many players, teams were there when you both were in Little League versus how many players there were when you graduated high school?
Definitely less.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you take that step up, you are going to leave a bunch of people behind. I remember when I was like 6, 7 years old doing coach pitch ball, we had, I believe, like 14 teams that had, I don't know, between like 14 and 16 players on each team, something like that. And that was just for, one age group kind of thing. And then by the time we graduated high school, there were four of us that went on to play college ball. One of us quit after the first semester of their freshman year. That wasn't me. I played all 5 years I had. One of them are actually one of our best players. He signed with Miami of Ohio, and he tore his rotator cuff, well, during his senior year, but then he went and tried to play on it like that fall and hurt himself even worse. He ended up redshirting and then just never played again. I played a full college career as a pitcher, and then our first baseman played Division I ball at Youngstown State University in Ohio, and played, I believe, 3 or 4 years of independent ball in the Frontier League. So he, made it professionally. But you think of out of those hundreds of kids we started with when we were kids, at the very end, there's only, a less than a handful of you after high school even. Eventually, we're all told that we can no longer play the child's game. You have to always hang up the spikes at some point, whether that is in Little League or whether that is after a 20-year professional career, that remains to be seen. But either way, you're looking through overall development. The longer you can keep your shoes on, the better development you're going to have. What are we developing assistant coaches for?
I guess to kind of help you carry out your coaching philosophy.
Okay, maybe. You definitely want to have the most adept assistants you can. You want to make sure they know what they're doing and that they can specialize in whatever it is they do. So, you have a pitching coach, you want them to be the best pitching coach they can be. You have a hitting coach, you want them to be the best hitting coach they can be. But baseball, softball, to a lesser extent basketball, and most every other non-football sport in college, if you're not a head coach, you're not making too much money. So ultimately, you're developing assistant coaches in these kinds of fields to become a head coaches themselves. Now, granted, sometimes, you have, a coaching staff that stays pretty tight knit. I remember a girl I knew that played softball. She was an All-American pitcher, and she got her first job in Oklahoma for a D2 team, and she was the pitching coach there, and the head coach she ended up partnering up with and following him everywhere he went for the next several years. So sometimes you get things like that where you do have coaching staffs that will stay together, but rarely in, say, non-football sports do you see things like that happen. So developing your coaches to be essentially able to do your job is something you're looking to do there. So really, largely speaking, with your goals as a coach, yeah, there's like administrative stuff you can shoot for, like, making sure you have an appropriate budget and all that good stuff. And we'll touch on some of that a little bit later. But your main goals as a coach are to win, to have a good culture, and to develop your players and coaches. I mean, that's really about all it comes down to. I mean, what else can you think of that you need to do? I mean, really, what else is there to do? Like I said, yeah, getting money is always a good thing. I mean, fundraising and making sure the program's well funded, all that good stuff. But that's kind of just secondary. in terms of, like I said, in terms of your actual goal development, you know, it's really those three things: the whole winning, culture, and development. Right. And last thing I wanted to finish with here is this bit here, coach's objectives. And what they mean here is your coach's objectives are your goals for yourself. So you can think of this as almost like introspection, how you would evaluate yourself. Now, some of these, you know, keep getting better as a coach. Well, what does that really mean? If you're getting better as a coach, aside from looking at, say, your record or your player statistics or anything like that, how would you know you're getting better as a coach?
I was gonna say like based off records, so I really have no idea.
Here's another way to think of it. How do I know I'm getting better as a professor?
Oh, if you're like, I guess if we are also learning and getting better as well. So same with players, if they're progressing and becoming a better player.
It's definitely one way. I teach applied nutrition here as well, and the first assignment they have is to do an article, a journal article review, and it has to be a peer-reviewed journal article. And I was explaining to them, you know, what it actually means to be peer-reviewed, and peer-reviewed just means that you are submitting an article or a research study, whatever, to a journal that then gets evaluated by experts in the field. So you don't have to be an expert necessarily to write the article, but the people evaluating you do need to be. So as a professor, I get evaluated, you know, obviously from students and the opinions of teaching and things like that, you know, the way their grades are, if they complain to, like, say, the dean or not, that's definitely goes in there. But my every semester evaluation comes from other faculty members. So you may see someone from, you know, the exercise science department sitting in on one of our classes or whatever, because they're evaluating me. How would that relate to being evaluated as a coach?
I think one way, like my school probably did it, like our athletic director would like administer surveys and ask the players what we thought.
That's definitely a way to go about it. You know, usually with, like, say, coaches, you don't have, like, say, that kind of same evaluation system you would, like I would as a professor, but still you want to get the opinion, like the honest opinion of the people around you, especially, like, say, your assistant coaches, the administrators. Truthfully, the administrators have no problem giving you a good you know, blatant true opinion, but getting the opinions of your assistants, definitely, because they're the ones that you're going to interact with every day, kind of thing. That's going to go a long way with helping you to do a self-evaluation on, am I getting better, or are things going in the direction they should be? If assistant coaches aren't willing or able to give you honest feedback, that immediately should be a red flag to you. It's one thing to say, you know, be mean to someone. You don't want to be mean or anything like that and vindictive. But if, for example, you know, Hannah, you've shown that you don't know how to correctly teach hitters how to slap bunt, and because you want all of them to do it right-handed, and they can only do it right-handed. Well, objectively speaking, they need to be able to do it left-handed, right? If I were as your assistant coach and I were to say, oh yeah, things are great, you're doing perfect, and you find out later that you know that's not the case, you know I'm not giving you an honest, true opinion. Therefore, you don't know or aren't able to gauge your personal progression or development as the head coach. That's one of the big problems with being at the top. Who do you answer to? You know, when you depend on people that are underneath you or your direct reports to give you feedback on how you're doing, it's very difficult because you sign their paycheck kind of thing. You know, if you think about it in in terms of a job or whatnot, you know, how likely is it that a worker is going to tell their boss that they're not doing a good job kind of thing? It's difficult there. This goes into or ties directly into having a positive culture. In a positive, welcoming culture, you know then that if you give constructive feedback as an assistant coach to the head coach, you know, you're not going to be retaliated against. It's going to be taken as a professional criticism, not a personal attack, that kind of thing. So that kind of thing goes hand in hand with building that culture along with getting that development for yourself as a head coach. You should know your strengths. That should be something that it does take, you know, really just self-reflection to figure out what are my strengths? What do I feel like my core competencies are? You know, even think about if you're going for a job interview. I mean, you hear almost all the time, you know, tell me your strengths, that kind of thing. Well, I really, for myself, I view my core competency as I know how to learn. That's my biggest strength, I think. As a coach, you should know what your biggest strength is. My biggest strength is I am the best recruiter there is. Or my best strength is I am the best pitching coach, or I'm the best hitting coach, that kind of thing. I'm also good at these things, but here's what my core competency is. We talked a little bit about the psychological side of things, and that's going to be something we'll dive a little bit more into when we get into communication as well. This here, stay committed to the plan. When you look at statistics for baseball or softball, and you look at like those sabermetric type statistics, they will go, you know, they give you every single nuanced statistic for anything you can imagine. But those are really only valid and only really work when you have a large sample size. So you take a full season or something like that. That's when you have those laws of averages to even out. You know, they even out those ebbs and flows. You take a very short, say, series, like if you are in, say, the conference tournament for baseball or softball, it's a double elimination tournament, right? So if you lose 2 games, you're out. That's it. Game over. Season's done. If you lose 2 games during the regular season, you've got 53 others that can make up for it. So being committed to your plan needs to be something that you do throughout that whole season. If you just all of a sudden scrap everything and are trying to start over mid-season, that's really not going to go so well. Usually what happens if you scrap your kind of plans midway through the season?
You're not going to do well, and you're most likely going to have a losing season.
More likely than not, you're doing it for another coach because your head coach got fired. That's usually what happens when you absolutely just blow things up and we're going to start from scratch, but you know, we're in week 5 of the season kind of thing. So staying committed to the plan, I mean, it's pretty self-intuitive. You know, you start something, you end something the same way you started it kind of thing. When it's not working, like if you're losing consistently, usually you have a change in coaching, especially when you get to like the college and professional level. That usually is what happens there if you're going to scrap the whole plan. The keeping a balance in your life, this is really for everything. So right now, I am the faculty athletics representative for my school, my full-time job in Gilbert. And what that means is that I have to certify every student athlete's eligibility. So I have to literally sign my name on a piece of paper saying this athlete is eligible to play, reviewing their transcripts, their previous playing, all that good stuff. And I get a 3-credit hour course remission, meaning that during a normal academic year, I have to teach 24 total hours. So 12 hours in the fall, 12 hours in the spring. By having this job, I only have to teach 21 hours. Woohoo. On average, I spend for a 3-hour class about 10 hours a week is roughly it. So here we do 8-week semesters. So not 8 weeks, 8-week classes. So we do a fall 1, fall 2 kind of thing. So but roughly 80 hours a class is what I spend doing it. Over the last 2 weeks alone for this faculty athletic rep position, I have spent about 60 to 70 hours doing just that stuff. So the math doesn't work out for me. And truthfully, after doing that for that much time, just over the last 2 weeks, I just don't want to do it anymore. I'm kind of done with that. There's no balance there. Like I wasn't able, and thankfully we didn't start last week because I did absolutely nothing academically last week. It was all completely athletics. Now that's going to taper off as the year goes on because you only have to certify the new athletes at the beginning of each semester. But you see how without having balance there, you can't do everything, right? In terms of a coach, if you're a coach trying to do it all, you're not going to do anything. Our baseball team here has, as of right now, I believe 80 players. And granted, they're going to have a varsity and a JV team, but for a typical baseball team, you're looking at round about 30-ish players is usually, like for a college baseball team, it's usually about what you'll carry. Less for softball because you don't have as many pitchers and don't need as many pitchers. So having 80 players is just too many. Well, what happens if our head coach tried to do everything just by himself? I mean, he's going to get run into the ground kind of thing. It doesn't matter that he's a 17-year major league veteran. You can't stretch your body in that many different ways with that many different people. So you have to not only rely on, but trust your assistants to do their job. And you really can't micromanage them. If you micromanage, that's when you're not getting things done. Let them do their job. Have either of you ever had a job where you were micromanaged?
Yes.
And how did that feel?
It's really frustrating.
Yeah. And have you ever had a job where you had more of a hands-off boss?
Yes.
And how'd that go for you?
It's definitely a lot easier to just like do your best work, I think.
Yeah. When you're micromanaging, you essentially know at any given point of what you're doing is right or wrong. But at the same time, how many of you want to have, eyes on you 24 hours a day kind of thing? When you have a completely hands-off or close to a hands-off supervisor, you may lack the resources occasionally to do your job, but you know that you are being given the opportunity to just do your job kind of thing. If you're trying to, say, be a head coach and micromanage the pitching staff along with the pitching coach, doing hitting with the hitters along with the hitting coach, you're not going to be efficient. So that also goes right back into that whole culture thing. If you as a head coach trust your assistants to do the job you hired them to do, it's going to make not only your life easier, but it's going to make for a much better culture. The last thing I'll leave you with here is one of the things that I learned from, say, like leadership training and whatnot, is one of the best things you can say to your immediate supervisor is, what can I do to make your job easier? What that essentially just shows is that you are adding value to yourself by not only trying to take on more responsibilities, but also trying to help the boss or the supervisor to not have to do certain tasks that may be more time consuming and should be done by, like, say, the frontline employees kind of thing. Doing things like that are ways to help build that trust, build that rapport, so that you have a better overall relationship in really whatever you're doing kind of thing. All right, so that's about all I wanted to get into for today. Do either of you have any questions on the assignment here so far?
No, not really.
All right, we'll go over this again on Friday. Again, make sure you post something on that welcome to the class discussion question. And then if you guys don't have any other questions, you are all good to go. And I will see you all here then on Friday.
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know how Welcome Week's going to work, but I know that I'm going to have to be moving some people in at some point. If that affects week 3, should I just email you about that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.